I am so happy to be here in the beautiful town of Plymouth to recognize and honor our Korean veterans. A round of applause for all of our wonderful veterans who are here today. We are so grateful that you are here, and we are going to begin with one of those very distinguished gentlemen who will start our program with the Pledge of Allegiance. And I would invite you to please stand if you are able. And I'm going to bring up Mr. Joseph Glazier, who served in the United States Army. And I'd ask Mr. Glazier to please come forward for the Pledge of Allegiance. And I'd ask if you would please remain standing for the singing of our country's national anthem. Mr. Glazier.
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, sir. And now it is my pleasure to introduce one of Terryville High School's very talented students, Ms. Kayla Zako. And Kayla's going to be singing our country's national anthem. Kayla.
Stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Kayla, thank you so much. You did a great job. And if, ladies and gentlemen, you would please be seated, it is my pleasure to introduce for our invocation the Reverend Zach Mabe of the Terryville Congregational Church. Reverend.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we give you thanks and praise for this day, for the opportunity to gather together and to give thanks for our Korean War veterans. Dear God, we ask that you be with us today during this ceremony, that you send your Spirit to guide us. Dear God, as we gather today and as we celebrate and honor Korean War veterans here in Plymouth, we're also mindful of the veterans across our state and across our country. And we're mindful of veterans both of the Korean War and of other wars and conflicts. We lift them up to you. We're also mindful, dear God, of those currently serving. We also lift them up to you. We ask that you be with us, that you be with all of our veterans and those currently serving, our true heroes. And we ask this all in your great name. Amen.
Reverend, thank you so much. And with that, I want to introduce our co-host of this ceremony today, the Honorable Vin Festa, who, when I called him some months ago and asked him if he would be willing to be part of and help us with this ceremony, he was so enthusiastic. And we have had the pleasure of working together to say thank you to your town's World War II veterans as well. And his help and the help of all of the staff at Town Hall was critical because, you know, you might think that somewhere in Washington, D.C. or in Hartford, there's a list of all of our military veterans, and there isn't. And so it took a lot of investigation and diligence to bring all of us together. And so I thank Vin and all of those who helped at Town Hall for their efforts. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you the fearless leader of Plymouth, the Honorable Vin Festa.
Thank you, Susan. Good morning. I'll be very brief in my remarks this morning. I want to follow up on what Susan just said. You may find that there are a number of people who have not been noticed relative to this event this morning, simply because, as Susan pointed out, there isn't a list that you can refer to at the national level or state level. Much of our research came from the local records relative to the tax rolls and people who are receiving veterans credit. So if there is someone out there in the community that you know of, whether it be relative, friend, neighbor, who had not been noticed, by all means, please spread the word, and we'll make sure that they will receive their honor certificates as well. Now, in regards to the assembly here today, this is a follow-up, as Susan pointed out, to one that was done a while back here on honoring the World War II veterans. Susan has taken upon herself, and she's somewhat humble when she tells you about these ceremonies that take place. But she has traveled throughout the state, morning, noon, evening, to do presentations to the veterans across the state for the time and effort that they have given to bring forth the freedom that we enjoy to this very day. There are those of us that honor those that didn't make it, didn't come back to us. But we also honor those of you that did come back. You build the foundation upon which we are living today. Those children that will be here tomorrow as adults are on the same foundation that you help to secure, to keep ourselves free, to keep ourselves united, and to keep ourselves as a nation who understands the need to support and defend democracy at all cost. So on behalf of the town of Plymouth, I want to tell you with a heartfelt thanks that we all appreciate your war efforts, your efforts here at home, what you've done for each and every one of us, the lives that you allow us to continue in a free spirit and a democratic society. So on behalf of the town of Plymouth, I want to thank you. May God bless you. May God keep you and your family. We may meet again when we go back to celebrate and recognize the Vietnam era veterans as well. So this morning is yours. Enjoy it in good health, good friendship, and in the spirit of what we're all about, united, one and one for all. Thank you and have a good day.
Mayor, thank you so much. And I wanted to just share with you how it was that our office came to host these ceremonies in partnership with towns around the state. And it all started 3 years ago when I heard our Commissioner of Veterans Affairs give a stunning statistic. And it was that every day in Connecticut we are losing 40 of our World War II veterans. And this struck me because my dad is 88. He's a World War II veteran that remarkably still fits into his Army Air Corps uniform. And I thought, time is of the essence, and we should do something special to say thank you to our greatest generation. And that started our office in a journey that took us to 150 towns across the state where we had the opportunity to meet 15,000 living World War II veterans, if you can imagine that. I just can't even begin to express to you what an enriching experience that has been. And along the way, as I was meeting these World War II veterans and listening to their stories, I found that many of them had also served in the Korean War as well. And I made the promise to those veterans of the Korean War that if and when we finished those World War II ceremonies, that we would embark upon a similar effort to say thank you to the veterans of what's known as the Forgotten War. And so here we are today to do that. But before I go any further, I wanted to take the opportunity to recognize the veterans in this auditorium who have served in both wars, because I know we have at least one. And so I'm going to ask all the veterans who have served in both World War II and Korea to please either raise your hand or stand up so that we can see who you are. One. There's more than that, though. There's more than that. We so appreciate that. One of the problems is often these ladies and gentlemen are so humble that they don't even raise their hand to be recognized. But, sir, we thank you so much for your service in both World War II and Korea. You are absolutely remarkable, and we thank you for being here today. So with that, I'd like to take all of you back to a time 60 years ago, just a few years after the end of World War II, when a new group of very courageous American men and women joined the United Nations and the South Korean forces to fight communist aggression in the Korean Peninsula. On June 25, 1950, the United States came to the aid of the Republic of South Korea after the North Korean army crossed the 38th parallel. When our nation and other nations around the world needed you, you joined nearly 5.7 million Americans who answered the call to defend, and I quote from the Korean War Memorial in Washington, D.C., "a country you never knew and a people you never met." Over 400,000 of the people who served in Korea had also served during World War II. And whether you began your service in World War II or whether you had served in Korea in the military for the first time, you left your family, education, small businesses, professions, the comforts of American life to serve our country when you were needed. Some of you were very young men and young women with your entire lives ahead of you, and you risked everything to protect our freedom on the other side of the world. Many of you endured physical pain, emotional loss, the loss of loved ones and colleagues in the war. Some of you may have even been prisoners of war. You fought on very harsh terrain. The winter of 1950 in Korea was known for its intense cold and prolonged days of snow and sub-zero temperatures. And sadly, American soldiers were vastly unprepared for that cold and harsh climate. And after China joined the conflict on November 3rd, 1950, our soldiers were often vastly outnumbered. Some of you may have fought in the desperate Battle of Kusan, or you may have been at the Chosin Reservoir, or some of you may have been involved in the hand-to-hand combat that took place at Heartbreak Ridge, or Porkchop Hill. And some of you may have even been part of that historic landing at Inshan under the direction of General Douglas MacArthur. Korea was an incredibly costly war for our country. Between June 1950 and July 1953, we lost nearly 55,000 American soldiers, and more than 105,000 of our soldiers were wounded. And nearly 6,000 of them were listed as either missing in action or were taken as prisoners of war. And here in Connecticut, we will never forget the 326 soldiers of the Korean War who gave, as President Lincoln said, the last full measure of their devotion to the cause of liberty. 80 Connecticut soldiers are still to this day listed as missing in action, and we will never forget their contribution and honor their sacrifice. You know, the Korean War was different from World War II in many respects. For one thing, it was never officially declared, and it was never officially ended. And unfortunately, it had none of the glory or shared sense of national purpose that our country felt when we were fighting Nazi tyranny in World War II. And I think David Halberstam said it very well when he wrote in his book, The Coldest Winter, no matter the bravery they showed or the validity of their cause, the soldiers of Korea had been granted a kind of second-class status compared to those who fought in previous wars. And so, in small measure, it's our hope that we address that wrong of history with this ceremony today to let you know that we have never forgotten what you've done, that you are our heroes, and that we will always remember what you did to preserve our democracy and our freedom. I've had the opportunity to meet so many Korean veterans, and I think to the person, they share these three qualities. They are very modest and humble about what they did. They are very resilient people, because here we are today, and many of those who served are well into their 80s or even older, depending on whether they served in World War II beforehand. And yet, despite all they went through, all the challenges and hardships they endured, they came back to our state, raised beautiful families, and helped make our state and our country what they are today. And finally, the reason that I admire them so much is they are role models for what good citizenship should be. They are people who have continued to give back in so many ways. After they finish their military service, these are the people who continue to give back through veterans organizations, through serving in local government, through volunteering, through being part of church leadership and charities, and they make our communities what they are today, and that's why we applaud them as well. And I wanted to share with you in closing one of the best statements that I have seen about what our Korean veterans have done for our country. And so I will quote from President Bill Clinton, and you'll forgive me, but President Clinton is not one known for his brevity, so bear with me. But here it is. And President Clinton said these words when he dedicated the Korean War Memorial in 1995. In a struggle so long and consuming, perhaps it's not surprising that too many lost sight of the importance of Korea. But we now know, with the benefit of history, that those of you who served and the families who stood behind you laid the foundation for one of the greatest triumphs in the history of human freedom by sending the clear message that America had not defeated fascism to see communism prevail. You put the free world on the road to victory in the Cold War. That is your enduring contribution. And I think that says very eloquently what you did for us in the history of our country, and we will always be indebted to you for what you have done for all of us. So with that, I'd like to ask all of our Korean veterans if they are able to please stand so that we can applaud and salute you together. Ladies and gentlemen. I wish you all had front row seats so you could see how good you look. We appreciate so much everything that you have done. And in a moment, we are going to ask our veterans to share their stories with us. And so I'm going to ask you to think about sharing a memory or a reflection with us. And I know you were taught never to volunteer, but I'm hoping that some of you might share your experience with us. But before we do that, we have a special presentation that one of our Korean veterans would like to make. And so I'd like to introduce Mr. Henry Raymond, who has a special presentation to make. Mr. Raymond.
As the team leader of the Bristol Veterans Honor Guard, I want to present you this flag today in honor of all the Korean War vets who are here today and all the veterans, past and deceased. This flag is to be hung up in the City Hall in Terryville. Veterans in Bristol Association. Thank you very much.
I want to thank Henry for all the work he's done on behalf of the veterans, their families. He's spent many long, difficult hours getting services and support. I think we owe him a great deal and a round of applause. Thank you for the hat from the Korean veterans, Bristol. And let me just say, I humbly accept this flag on behalf of the residents of this town. Deeply appreciate it, Henry, and it will hang with honor in our town hall. Thank you.
So with that, we are coming to the best part of our program, which is to listen to some of the stories and reflections of our veterans. And you see, I've always admired Oprah, and now I have a microphone, and I can go right to you, because I know it can be sometimes intimidating to stand at a podium and speak. But I'm hoping that somebody's going to volunteer to share one of their reflections or experiences. And what I'll do is I'll go up this aisle, and don't worry, then I'll go over to this side. We won't forget about you folks over there. So we'll just start over here. And the good news, Mayor, is I come to Plymouth all the time, and I know that the citizens of Plymouth are not shy. So, anybody? Oh, thank you. Okay, hang on. I'm going to be right over there. See, somebody always helps me out. And once we get the conversation going, it's not hard.
I'm Mr. Batua from Cyber Drive, Terryville. 1950, we were up at Fort Drum when we got the word that we were federalized. And you could hear a pin drop. September, we left our families for 2 years, and we came back. We were stationed in Germany. We didn't go to Korea. We were one of the lucky ones. They sent us to Germany. But was very nice. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And one of the reasons that many served in Germany or Iceland or other parts of the world is because at the time we didn't know if it was going to turn into a global conflict. So there were those in Germany stationed there to make sure that if Russia got into it, we would be right there and ready to respond. Yes, sir.
I served in Europe 41 months. I signed up for Korea, but seeing that I spoke Polish, they sent me by the Russian border. And I've been there, and I used to patrol on the Orient Express. You people probably don't know which that is. But I've been on that train with a friend of mine, a buddy of mine. He'd be on one end, I'd be on the other end checking for American passports. And that was one of our jobs. And I patrolled on the Autobahn with a gendarme, auxiliary cop. He rode with me. And I patrolled all over the camps. I don't know which outfit I was in. I did police work. That's it.
Thank you, sir. And could you tell us your name? You didn't tell us who you were.
Paul Skripik.
Thank you so much, Mr. Skrippy. There you go. Anybody over here? I'm just going to come over here and see if anybody would like to. Okay. Ah, Mr. Sikorsky, here you are.
When I was during the Korean War, I also served in a different part of the world. I served my overseas time in North Africa. I was involved with the Air Weather Service, and our job was to make sure all the pilots of the B-47s, which was a new bomber at that time, were flying over Russia, making sure we could keep us safe during the Cold War. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I'm Bert Pelletier. I did my basic training in Fort Dix, New Jersey for 6 weeks. And the last week, the war signed the armistice, I guess. And I was due to go there, but they retrieved my order to send me to Germany. And there I was in a tank outfit. We were patrolling the east and west near to keep the Russian on their side. And I didn't experience too much combat because they used to sometimes to shoot our tanks, though, but that was just gunfire, small arms, so that didn't do any good to nobody. But I'm glad that I did serve 2 years for my country. I'm proud of that. Thank you.
Darrell the Merchant. I was in the Army for 3 years. I spent 1 year, 5 months, and 3 days in Korea. I think one of the better jobs I had, I was in the medical corps, was we processed the prisoners who were coming home. And probably the worst part, we wanted to get home for a Thanksgiving, and it took about 30 days to come across that puddle of water. And when we got to Seattle, the dock workers were on strike. And son of a gun, they wouldn't let us off the boat. So that was practically the end of my career. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody over here? All right, we'll just walk over here to see if anyone on this side would like to speak.
Hello, everybody. I was in the United States Navy from 1950 to 1954. I'd love to be able to tell you I was a hero, but I wasn't. I was a cook. I kept you guys well fed. And if there's anybody here who was stationed in Fleet Air Wing 5 or VP 7 or served a year in Japan in 53 to 54 at Iwakuni, I'd like to meet you after. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. You remind me of one of your colleagues, a cook who cooked on a ship during World War II. And when he came up to get his award at one of our ceremonies, he was from Portland. He said, Susan, this is the first time anybody said thank you for anything I ever did during the service. So people got a kick out of him. And we thank you so much for sharing your story.
Steve Panisuk. I don't know whether this is some distinction or not, but I believe I was the first individual to be drafted in the Korean War from the town of Plymouth. And actually, I was not the first to leave. There were other draftees ahead of me because I received a one-year deferment. But I still have the distinction that I was the first to be called for the Korean War.
Thank you, sir. Okay. All right. Well, anyone else who would like to? Yes?
Yes, my name is Jim Murdoch. We've heard from a number of us who are not actively involved in combat, nor was I, but I would like to hear from somebody that was actually in combat. I enlisted, and I spent 4 years. The Army would not take me because of a medical condition, so I enlisted in the Air Force. It was right at the time, and I think it was late 52 or early 53, I guess I enlisted. And we were out at Camp Stoneman, California, waiting for our ship to go to Korea, and a truce was signed. So I spent a couple of years traveling all over the northern part of Alaska, servicing the remote radar sites, and that dual line, I guess you would call it, when we were all watching Russia in the Cold War. So I was not in combat either, but I'll tell you, we certainly appreciate those of you who were. Thank you.
Are you volunteering someone else? You don't have to accept, but if you'd like.
Well, I was in Korea. As soon as I got there, because I was a sergeant, they sent me right up to the 38 parallel. In other words, this was South Korea and that was North Korea. So when I get up in the morning, I looked out the door and the fellow was up in North Korea. He waved to me and I waved to him. So he took his cane that he had, whatever he had. He broke it over the knee, he threw it on the ground and said, throw it away. You do the same thing. So I took mine up and broke it and threw it on the ground. So then he waved and laughed, and that was it. So every morning we get up, we wave to each other all the time. Where that man is today, I wish I would know where he was, and if he's still living or what happened to him, because we were both friends, we stayed together and both enemies. And still end up being friends. And I was very happy to be with them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I consider myself the youngest Korean veteran here. I went in the Marine Corps 17 years old trying to get to Korea, but they wouldn't send me. So I stayed in until Vietnam. And I consider myself the link between Korea and Vietnam. Thank you for serving.
You know, you are the continuation of my story. There were many people in World War II that served in Korea, and then there were many who were in Korea and continue to serve through the Vietnam era. And some amazing people who were career military who did all 3 wars. Oh, you are one of those. And when did you start in the service? What year did you start in the service?
1950. I went in 1950, and I went to Fort Dix. The unit I was in was supposed to go. I went to Korea. Fortunately, I guess the good Lord intervened. The unit I was supposed to go with got wiped out 3 days after they got to Korea. But I turned out to serve 36 years. I retired in 1987. 1986 for 36 years of service.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? I just wanted to make a point that this gentleman brought out. It's rare to hear at one of our ceremonies from anyone who served in the infantry in Korea. Often people are willing to talk about their service in Germany or Iceland or on aircraft carriers, or people were in the Air Force who were flying missions in and around Japan and Korea. But very few people, and I'm so glad this gentleman said a few words, are willing to talk about the service in the infantry, because it was a very, very difficult place to serve in, and many people to this day can't speak about it. So we appreciate what you had to say, sir. So with that, anyone else? Okay. Well, didn't our veterans do a great job of telling their stories? And so now we will begin the presentations of our veteran awards. And Ms. Tammy Marzik from our office is going to come forward, and she'll be reading the names of each of our honorees. And so if you have a family photographer, we're going to ask that you send that person down to take a photo, but we want you to know that our office will be taking 9x12 photos, and you should receive your photo within a couple of weeks of the ceremony. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the flag up right here, and I'm going to invite the mayor to come forward to be part of the photo. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, if it's more convenient for you to receive your certificate in your seat, if you just raise your hand when we call your name, we'll go right to you and make the presentation. So if that's more comfortable, you let us know. Okay.
Invite Councilman Sanshaw. Marty, would you please come down? Councilwoman Diana Schenkel, please come forward. And while we're waiting for the two of them to come down, I want to make a special thanks to the Board of Education for the opportunity to be involved in this particular auditorium this morning. Thanks to those of you, the residents, who supported the school project to get us to a place like this, and also serving refreshments in the cafeteria after the ceremony is over. I want to thank Mike Santagata and Superintendent DeStasio for their efforts that they put forward. Superintendent, Mike, please stand. Thank you for the support that you've given to this ceremony today.
William Allreed. Roland Anderson. You're next. Richard Anderson. Walter Anderson. Roland Belargian. Albert Bertua. Steve Bukowski. Ralph Capella. Robert Culver. Daryl DeMerchant. William Dillon. Michael Ivansky's son is here to accept on his behalf. Edwin Gangloff. Joseph Glazier. William Gollin. Raymond Kalinowski. Henry Kolakowski's wife is here to accept on his behalf. Is Daryl Merchant here? Daryl Merchant? Oh, no, it's, okay, you're all set? Okay. James Murdoch? Stephen Panasek? Bertrand Pelletier. Donald Pilatowski. Henry Raymond. Joseph Sikorsky. Kazimierz Skirpiak. Donald Sousa. Andre Saint Laurent. William Wartenik. Is there anybody's name that we did not call? Did we miss any of our veterans? Is it Gollin?
That,
Which one?
that might be him.
Gullin. Dave wants to retake a picture.
Oh, okay. Yep.
The one I'm not happy with.
Let me see the face. Let me see the face.
Um,
See his face.
Somebody close their eyes, so we have to do another one.
there he is.
Yep.
It's all blurry.
Gollin.
Mr.
Mr. Gollin? Can we retake your picture? Mr. Gollin? Yeah. Okay.
So we want to make sure that we didn't miss any of our Korean veterans, because if you came into the auditorium and you didn't check in with us, we would not have called your name. So is there any veteran that has not been called? Anyone? Going once? Okay. Well, a round of applause once again for our Korean War veterans. We're so proud of you. We thank everyone for coming today. God bless our veterans in the United States of America, and we hope that you will join us in the cafeteria for refreshments. Thank you all again. It's been a great privilege representing you. There you go. Thank you for doing this with us. Thank your assistant, because we know she's been...
He's here too, Ted is here.